And that was my, what I call my Brody moment. Do you remember the movie Jaws,
I
where
do.
at the end of the movie, the shark comes out for the first time and Sheriff Brody is there throwing chum out into the water and is scared to death because the shark, comes up and he turns around to the captain and he says, "You're going to need a bigger boat." And it was December of 1985 that I said to myself, I'm going to need a bigger boat. This is going to be way bigger than I ever thought.
I'm excited to share the following interview with one of my friends, Dr. Ivan Misner. I met Dr. Misner a few years ago, and we've become friends, and I got to go to his house and have dinner with him, and I know his wife, and he's really a great guy. So I'm going to read you his bio. Dr. Ivan Misner is the founder and chief visionary officer of BNI, that stands for Business Network International, or just BNI. They are the world's largest business networking organization. Founded in 1985, the organization now has over 11,200 chapters in 76 countries throughout every populated continent of the world. Last year alone, BNI generated 16.6 million referrals, resulting in more than $24.4 billion worth of business for its members. Dr. Misner is called the father of modern networking by both Forbes and CNN. He's considered one of the world's leading experts on business networking and has been a keynote speaker for major corporations and associations throughout the world. He's been featured in the LA Times, the Wall Street Journal, and New York Times, as well as numerous TV and radio shows, including CNN, the BBC, and the Today Show on NBC. He has traveled to all 7 continents of the world, including Antarctica. Among his many awards, he has been named Humanitarian of the Year by the Red Cross and has been the recipient of the John C. Maxwell Leadership Award. He is the co-founder of the BNI Charitable Foundation and is married to Jody Misner. Oh, and in his spare time, he's an amateur magician and a black belt in karate. Dr. Ivan Misner, I'm so glad to have you on my podcast. This is great. We connected a couple years ago. I went to your house a couple times for dinner. You're one of my mentors. I'm really grateful to have you here. Thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thanks, Matt. I think we met at a Jack Canfield seminar, which was amazing. And Jack's doing his very last mastermind this year. It's his last one. And hopefully we'll have a great turnout there. And yeah, you've been to my house a couple of times, seen my art collection and a couple of other cool things that I have. We really enjoyed having you over.
Yeah, you have an amazing house. It's a hashtag worthy goals.
It's my downsized house, actually.
Oh, well, it's a beautiful downsized house.
Well, yeah, the kids all moved out. So it's a little smaller, a lot more land, smaller home, a lot more land.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's start with, you told me once that when you exited BNI, that they pulled up the Brinks trucks to your house. I love that analogy, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But tell us.
Yeah, but just I didn't exit BNI.
Sorry, not exit.
I am still the founder and chief visionary officer. I still am an owner. I just don't own controlling interest anymore of BNI. So I never exited, not yet anyway.
Okay.
Someday they're going to put me to pasture. I don't know when that is.
All right. First, would you share with us kind of your background in employment and kind of how you got into business?
Well, I thought I was going to go into government work. I was working in public administration. I had a degree in public administration. Thought I was going to go in government work. I worked for the Department of Commerce for a little while. And I thought, yeah, no, I'm not going to work for the government. I worked for a nonprofit that was government funded. And I no, I need to be in business. I was the general manager. Very few people know this. I was the general manager for a light manufacturing company for a short while and just couldn't work with one of the owners. They were mad as a hatter. And so at a very young age, and I was working on my doctoral degree at that point at 27, I started my own consulting business. And I'd actually, technically, a couple of years earlier, I started a property investment company. When I was 25, I started a property company, which is still around today. And then at 27, I started a consulting business. And I lost one of my biggest clients because they just ran out of funding. And I needed referrals. So I put together some people I trusted, and I hoped they would trust me. And we would refer one another. And we only took one person per classification, so there was no competition in the room. Someone invited me, or someone asked me to open a second chapter of this thing called BNI. We actually called it the network back then. And I told them, no, this isn't what I do. I'm a business consultant. I don't run a network. And they said, well, this is kind of consulting. You're helping us build our business. I said, okay. And I opened a second chapter, and people came who couldn't join and asked if they could, if I'd help them open up a couple more. And I said, no, this isn't what I do. I'm a business consultant. And so at that point, we were just off to the races. And I realized that we don't teach this in colleges and universities anywhere in the world. We don't teach networking, emotional intelligence, social capital, and that people were really hungry for learning how to network effectively. And it was at the end of that first year when we opened 20 chapters without trying that I realized I had struck a chord in the business community. And it was at that point that I was like, okay, I need to pay attention to this. I'm being pulled through the marketplace and I need to pay attention to it. And that's when I created the plan to scale BNI. By the way, we now have 327,000 members, 327,000 paid members, 11,300 groups in about 75 countries around the world.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And it all started because there was a need not being met. And so
Yeah.
were you monetizing it with the first couple chapters? Were you charging people a monthly fee, a subscription kind of?
I was, yeah, it cost money to run a network. And so, yeah, we absolutely charged fees. And it was, I actually, in the early days, ran it through my consulting business. So it was the network and AIM consulting affiliate. So it was just part of my consulting business. But after the first year, I realized that this was going to be, like I said, much bigger. And I spun it off as a separate business.
And so did you deliberately set out to achieve 10,000 chapters, or what was your goal?
Yeah. So after I decided, it was in December of 1985, about 11 and a half months after I started BNI, I always take a little time between Christmas and New Year's to reflect, and to look forward. Where do I want to be in 5 years? How did things go last year? And that year is like, what the heck happened? This was not part of my plan. And that was what I call my Brody moment. Do you remember the movie Jaws,
I
where
do.
at the end of the movie, the shark comes out for the first time, and Sheriff Brody is there throwing chum out into the water, and is scared to death because the shark, comes up, and he turns around to the captain and he says, "You're going to need a bigger boat." And it was December of 1985 that I said to myself, "I'm going to need a bigger boat. This is going to be way bigger than I ever thought." And I wondered how big. And so now we're talking about that was the end of 85. So in 86, I started going to the library to do calculations because there was no Monsieur Google, where you could look up populations. So I, went to the library, got reference books and did calculations on how many chapters could we actually have someday. And I calculated that someday that the organization could have over 10,000 chapters. And now I remember I had that figured out by June of 86. Okay. So I remember saying to a friend of mine, his name was Bruce, and I said, "Bruce, I think someday I think we could have 10,000 chapters someday." And Bruce looked at me and he said, "And how many chapters do you have now, Ivan?" So, well, 30. He said, 30. And you think you could have 10,000? I said, yeah, actually, the numbers are there. I believe we can have 10,000 chapters. And 2020, during the middle of COVID, we crossed the line of 10,000 chapters.
Wow, what a
Yeah.
milestone.
Yeah, it
What
really was.
what were your calculations based on? What were you looking at that told you, yeah, we could hit 10,000?
The number of cities with populations of over 25,000 people. And I was also looking at the number of groups that service clubs had, like Rotary, Lions, Kiwanis. Not the same. BNI is not the same. Those are service clubs. But, there's an analog there. Local community groups getting together with business people. How many groups did they have? How long did it take them to get there? And based on the number of cities with certain population and different business organizations, I calculated that we could have over 10,000. Here's the thing that I didn't get right. I thought it would take 70 years, 70. I thought it would take
Wow.
70 years to get to 10,000. We did it in half that time. We did it in 35.
Wow. I want to circle back to that. For those who aren't familiar with BNI and haven't heard of it, can you kind of describe what it is and how it works?
Yeah, BNI is a referral platform that helps business people generate referrals for life. We meet on a weekly basis. Most of our groups meet in person. Some groups meet online exclusively, and some groups are hybrid. They meet in person once a month and then online the rest of the month. So there's a different mix. That all started because of COVID, where we literally transitioned 10,000 chapters from in person to online within a matter of months worldwide. But we get together every week and we pass each other referrals. And so last year we passed 16 million referrals worldwide. Our members passed 60. We know that because we track it in our online platform, BNI
Mm-hmm.
Connect. So our members upload the data. So this is data from our members. And based on our member reports, they passed 16 million referrals and they generated 25.4 billion with a B, 25.4 billion US dollars worth of business, what we call thank you for closed business, the amount of business our members generated for each other. Now, here's the thing that really blows me away with that. Based on United Nations estimates of GDP, gross domestic product, there are actually 100 countries in the world with a lower GDP than what BNI generated for its members last year alone.
That number, the 25 billion, is just 1 year?
1 year. That's just 1 year. Yeah. We did
Holy smoke.
25 billion in 2024.
Wow. So you had predicted that this thing was going to hit 10,000. It was going to take 70 years.
Yeah.
How did you, so you basically had a hockey stick? Was there an inflection point where it went kind of straight up and really started gaining momentum? Or what was the catalyst that kicked it off?
It does look like a hockey stick. And I would say probably around the year 2000, it really started taking off. And part of what I did was I did most of my calculations on North America. I didn't look at the world. And that's one of the reasons why we did it in 35 years rather than 70 years, is that we started going global. You know, when I started BNI, I wasn't thinking globally at the moment. Even though BNI stands for Business Network International, that wasn't the original name. We couldn't trademark the original name, so we had to change the name. And by that point, we were moving into some international opportunities. So I think that's why we did it so much quicker. Did that answer your question? I think I went off track a little. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow.
It's been Mr. Toad's wild ride, Matt. It really has.
Yeah, obviously.
Oh,
So
you
it
asked about the
sounds,
hockey stick. Yeah. So as
yeah.
we started to go international, the hockey stick effect really kicked in, and we opened our first country outside of the U.S. in 1995.
So about 10 years after
Yeah, it was about
first
10 years,
started.
and it was really funny. The first country we opened in outside of the U.S. was Canada. It's pretty straightforward. But I didn't know if it would work in another country. You know, you don't know what you don't know at that point. And so I remember, and this is not a joke. This is absolutely true. We had a mixer the night before the launch of our Canadian chapters. We were going to do two chapters, 2 days apart or 1 day apart. And I asked this woman who was part of one of the kickoffs. I said, and she's a local, and I said, do you think this BNI thing, do you think it's going to work here in Canada? And she said to me, she said, oh, honey, I was young, I was like 38 then. Like, oh, honey, Canadians are basically Americans with cheap healthcare and no guns. This will work well here in Canada. And I'm like, okay, all right, that works. And so it was a Canadian who said that to me. And it actually, I don't know if it's true or not. It probably is true, but it certainly worked out. The Canadian members loved the program, and we've operated in Canada ever since.
It's always interesting to me, new entrepreneurs, we have this vision of what it's going to be in our mind, what we think it's going to be. But then the doubt kind of balances and you play this teeter-totter game of it's going to be huge. No, it's going to be tiny. It's going to be huge. And so did you have some of that? Did you have doubts and fears? And
Well, you always have fears. Certainly, cash flow is one of the fears that you run into. No, I knew it would. I really felt confident it would be big in the U.S. What I didn't understand how to deal with early on was the weird different mentality, because I ran into that in the US. Literally in the first year. It was, when we opened up chapters in the San Fernando Valley of California, they said, no, this won't work here. We're different than you guys over in the San Gabriel Valley. And it was pretty easy for me to do, being raised in California, it's pretty easy for me to deal with that. But when we started opening in other countries, you're an outsider. I mean, I was an insider. I was born in America. I was raised in California. And so it was easy for me to deal with it. But when we started opening in other countries, we had to learn how to deal with that. And we learned with that on like our third international launch, which was Australia, where we gave out our manual and it was in American English. So, like organization was spelled with a Z instead of an S, and check
Yeah.
was spelled CHECK instead of CHECQUE, and those kinds of things. And when we opened in Australia, they said, "This is an American. This won't work here. This is an American program, and it's not going to work here down under." And so I talked to the director, and at that time our manual was only about 350 pages for the director,
Mm.
and he said, "Look, I'm going to run it through spell check and change all of the spelling from American English to British English, Australian English. And instead of saying good morning, everyone, I'm going to change it to, good day, mates, that kind of thing." And I
Wow.
said, "Yeah, great, do that." And so the next chapter he kicked off, he handed out the Australian version. Now they made, I think it was something like 400 changes to the manual, but it was all spelling changes. And he handed out part of the manual to the members and he said, "Look, you guys, this started in the US, but this is no longer an American program. This is an Australian program. We made
Wow.
400 changes to the director's manual. Here's the leadership team manual." And they're like, "Yeah, mate, this will work great here." And the one thing we all have in common is that we all think we're different. And
Absolutely.
and are we different? Yes, but we forget something really important, and that is there is a culture of entrepreneurism. And so we look at our cultural differences and we forget there's also a culture of entrepreneurism. And what BNI has done is given an overlay, a system on top of their culture. We don't ignore their culture. We just have a system on top of their culture. Entrepreneurs want to do things that are more effective or more efficient. If you teach them how to do things that are more effective and more efficient and not butt heads with them about the cultural issues, but embrace the cultural issues, but follow the system that works, it can be successful. I'll give you one more example. When we opened in Japan they call it the Maishi ritual, where you hand a card by holding both ends and you hand
Wow.
it to somebody, they bow, they take the card, they comment on the card. It's a whole ritual. And so when we opened up in Japan, some people said to me, BNI is never going to work in Japan. Japan's so different culturally. I mean, even business cards, the way you hand out business cards. Americans, "Oh, here's my card, take it." It's no big deal, right? And you can write on a card, and you can't write on cards in Asia. Not a lot. No, that's a big no-no,
Wow.
particularly in Japan and China. So they said this won't work. They're different. And I said, "Okay, but we're still handing out cards.
Mm.
Americans aren't handing out paperweights,
Right.
and Japanese are handing out business cards. We're both handing out business cards. And what we tend to do is we look at all of our differences and say this won't work, but we don't look at our similarities. And so what we started looking at as we opened now in 75 countries, we looked at our similarities and we played into that. And you could go to a BNI program in any country around the world. If you've seen it in your language and you're sitting in a meeting in another language, you will know exactly where they are in the meeting, even though you don't understand what they're saying, because it is so consistent worldwide.
That's amazing and so true. You mentioned systemization or systems, and the fact that you had a 350-page manual, I think definitely speaks to that. Can you unpack that a little bit? Because I know some of the most successful businesses in the world have systems.
Yeah.
And where did you get this idea?
Well, our manuals now are probably 1,000 pages or more. They're substantial for different manuals for different people. I understood that systems were important early on. Right about the time I was starting BNI, I read a book by someone who's now a friend of mine, Michael Gerber, who wrote the book, The E-Myth, The Entrepreneurial Myth. And in it, he says, write everything down as though you're going to franchise your business, even if you have no intention of franchising your business. I thought, well, that's good advice. There's no way I'm going to ever franchise BNI, but yeah, that's good advice. So I started writing everything down, right? Creating manuals. Guess what? Like 6 years into BNI, I'm like, well, wait a minute, why can't I franchise? This actually would make a good franchise. And so by 1991, I was franchising BNI because I had created systems and manuals to put in place to let people buy in. So many of our regions are locally owned and operated.
Oh, Michael Gerber, I think the E-Myth was kind of the Bible of systemization. And that's
Yep.
what got me started on the journey. And I tried several times to document what we were doing, and it didn't always work really well. And David Jennings just came out with Systemology and System Hub, and Michael Gerber actually endorsed him. And so David was on our podcast recently. So the thing I say about systems is it makes the invisible visible.
Yeah.
And to be great, you need to iterate. And when you have it in writing, it's very easy to tweak and see what's going on. Like you said, the business card or the good day, mate, or good morning. And so I think that's a genius idea. That's excellent.
It is. One of the things you want to make sure, though, is to not give your manuals out in files that can be changed.
Ah,
Don't give them out in Word files because I promise you, your local operator will totally change it.
so did
They'll
you
be
put it
like,
in PDF?
I don't know what they're doing. I have a better idea. And they're going to put in something really stupid that maybe you've tried before. You want to hand out manuals that are not editable.
Wow, that's really good advice. That's
Yeah,
great.
I know this the hard way.
So what were some of the other major challenges that you had throughout this?
Well, the systems were one, education was the other, and they kind of go hand in hand with the systems that you can't just hand somebody a manual. You have to actually train them because it's the hidden elements of the training. People say, well, look, I could just read the manual. Well, yeah, you can. First of all, you can. Secondly, you won't. And thirdly, in the training, it's the value added content that you provide that makes a difference. So you might talk about an element of the meeting, but what you can do when you're training is give an example of an element of the meeting and why it says do this here now, because here's how we created it. Here's how we came up with it. These were the results. And so it's the value added content. Without the value added content, you get people not really following the system or the manual, and education can be a leaky bucket process. So that when you train me on something, some of the information leaks out. When I train somebody else, more information leaks out. When someone else trains somebody else, even more information leaks out. So you got to be really consistent in training people, using the manual, using the system, not letting them change the system without approval. Now, we've allowed over the years experimental programs where somebody could experiment with something locally to see if it worked or didn't work. And if it worked, then we would expand it worldwide. But if it didn't work, we would have them stop doing it. There are a number of programs in BNI that were created that way.
I love that analogy of value added content. To me, what it invokes is the old black and white still photographs. And then they went to a color photograph. And then we had some moving pictures, but we didn't have audio. And then finally, now we have,
Right.
everything that we do. And it's that idea that you miss some things, just like you miss things from the black and white photo. You miss it if it's just in black and white. And so teaching it is that missing piece of the puzzle. So that was a great discovery for you.
Yeah, it absolutely was. It was one of the challenges we had early on. I think a couple of the other challenges was certainly in learning how to delegate. I mean, I had a pretty good idea how to delegate, but I really honed my skill in the early days. And what they don't teach in business school is that you have to delegate responsibility and authority. Okay, that's the key to delegation, an authority. So we give people responsibility, but then we say, why did you do that? And then we give people get in trouble for you gave them responsibility and then they made a bad decision. So a couple of things. You can't give a new employee or a learner 100% authority, right? So you give a learner, I don't know, 50% authority. You say, here are your boundaries. You can make any decision within these boundaries. Oftentimes there's a cash boundary. You can't spend this or spend that. And that boundary may vary depending on the role. My new receptionist had this boundary. My new CEO had this boundary. So the boundaries may vary. And you give them 50% authority, just for argument's sake, 50%.
Sure.
But then over time, 60, 70, 80, 90, when they've really learned the job, which could take maybe as much as a year, you're giving them 90, 95% authority. The only thing I ever held back from my employees was legal. If somebody's saying, I'm talking to a lawyer, they got to call me. They got to bring me in. And financial. You have authority to spend this amount. If it's going to go over that, you have to see me. So you have to give responsibility and authority. Now many bosses will say, yeah, but they're going to screw up. Yes, you can take it to the bank. They will screw up.
Yep.
But have we not screwed up? I think some of the biggest screw ups in my company I made. And so, yeah, they're going to screw up. That's the only way they're going to learn. And you have to ask yourself, did they make a mistake because they were being irresponsible? Or did they make an honest mistake based on the information they had? And if it was an honest mistake, it's a learning opportunity. It's a teaching opportunity. If it's because they were irresponsible, fire them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's one part of that's education. The other is it's a people problem and they shouldn't be trusted again. Yeah.
So I'm sure there are a lot of other things. I'm actually working on a book right now called Garage to Global.
Garage
How
to
do you
global.
Garage to Global? How do you take your business from your garage? Because I started my business in my home
Mhm.
and my garage and a room above my garage. How do you take it from garage to a global enterprise? We now have a dozen offices all around the world, not counting our franchises. And so I'm working on a book now. Here's one of the other things that we talk about in the book. If you want to be successful as a business person, you got to do 1,000 things. You got to do 6 things 1,000 times. You got to do 6 things 1,000 times, not 1,000 things 6 times. Most business people tend to do 1,000 things 6 times, and they're
Mhm.
constantly chasing these bright, shiny objects, right? Oh, look at that. Let's try this. Let's try that. Instead of doing what other people have done, and they know that it works.
Yes.
Now, and by the way, it doesn't have to be 6, it could be 5, it could be 7, but you do them 1,000 times. So the key is to find mentors, to come to podcasts like this, and follow people who you know or you get to know as virtual mentors, and you trust their advice. They're successful. That's key. They are truly successful. And follow those people and do what they suggest. Don't listen. Some of the least successful people have the loudest voices of advice. And
Yes.
and so you want to make sure that you're listening to the right people. And if you're listening to the right people, then do what they say. Don't reinvent the wheel.
Yeah. If I'm going to go and work out, I want to take lessons from Arnold Schwarzenegger, not some wimp down the street, right?
Yeah. Yeah. You
Ah,
want to take lessons from a professional who you can see that they're walking the talk and they have some success. Yeah.
for sure. Absolutely. I want to pivot real quick to the Brinks truck pulling up.
Yeah.
And how did that change your life in a good way? And were there any sort of existential crises where you said, why am I here? What's my purpose? Let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, listen, when we had the transaction where I brought in partners into BNI, Brinks Truck did roll up. You got to be smart. I put a lot of my money in irrevocable trusts so that they were generational, so that when I
Hmm.
die, it passes on. However, one of my concerns was that my kids would be, trust babies. And so the opening line to the trust is this is meant to be a safety net, not a hammock.
Wow. Love that.
And it limits the kind of usage that the trust provides. And the limits are things like medical, purchasing a home, education. So those 3 things are no brainers. The trust would support the children for those kinds of things. So, it was life changing for me, for my kids. It took a little bit of the responsibility away from me for saying no, because the trust could say, yeah, no, this doesn't qualify as an expense. And so I'm like, hey, you're sorry, but that's the way your mom and I set it up, and they're just following the rules. So
That's the idea of making one good decision, and then everything that follows that is a lot easier.
yeah, yeah. And it took them a while to get that, but they got it. I think it could have been traumatic for me if a couple things didn't happen. One was I had a plan on what I would do after investors bought into my company. I had a plan. And that plan was that I wanted to stay on board with the company as, I wanted to be the spokesperson for the organization. So I kind of went from being King Arthur leading the charge to being Colonel Sanders and being the spokesperson for the organization. I wanted to do that. And if I could do that, then I didn't think I would quit. I was also on the board. I'm still on the board of directors for the company. And so it's been 10 years since the transaction, the original transaction, 10 and a half years. And I'm still actively involved. I work 4 days a week for BNI. And I still own that real estate business that I started before BNI. And so people say you must be really busy. I don't like to say I'm busy. I like to say I have a full life. Sometimes it's more full than other times, but I have a full life. Everybody says they're busy. I know retired people that say, "Oh, I'm so busy. I don't know. I'm just so busy." I'm like, "You're retired, man. How could you be busy?" So I don't like to say I'm busy because everybody says they're busy. I like to say I have a full life. And I do. I have a very full life. And I'm very happy with the role that I've transitioned to. The people who invested did what they said they would do. They allowed me to do what I said I wanted to do. As a matter of fact, and I'll leave you with this one last thought. We now have a new CEO of the company, but the CEO who led the first investment in 10 years, Matt, in 10 years, do you know just about the only question he asked me every few months?
What's that?
Are you still having fun?
Really?
It was it. He never said, what are you working on? What are you doing? When are you taking your vacations? He never asked any of that. The only question he would ask in terms of my personal engagement in the business was, are you still having fun? Or he'd ask me to speak somewhere or do something, but are you still having
Yeah.
fun? I was like, yeah, I'm having a blast. He's like, great. Let me know when you're not. That was it.
What advice would you give to somebody who is looking at selling or exiting or bringing on investors?
Yeah. The first thing is you got to decide what you just described. Are you selling and walking away, or are you bringing on investors? Or are you bringing on people who will partner with you in some way? And if you're bringing on investors, generally speaking, they're going to want controlling interests. So and that's what happened with me. You got to first decide what you want, and then when you decide what you want, selling and walking away in some ways is easier in that you're not staying on board and hoping that the people will do what they say in terms of keeping you. On the other way, and another way that's not easier is that what are you going to do now? Go out and golf? What are you doing with your life? So I didn't, I wanted to continue to do but I think an entrepreneur is either working in their flame or working in their wax. They're in
That a
their,
little bit. I love this saying. Yes.
yeah. And I have it in a couple of my books. When you're working in your flame, you're on fire, you're excited, you're passionate about what you're doing. People can hear it in your voice. They can see it in the way you behave. When you're working in your wax, it just takes all your energy away. People can hear that in your voice and they can see that in the way you behave. My flame was doing interviews like this. This is my flame. And I do probably 150 to 200 of these a year. And
Wow.
so I love doing these. I'm happy to do them. And I wanted to continue to do it. So you got to decide, what do you want? That's the first thing. And if you decide, I want a partner so I can work in my flame, then it's like finding a spouse.
Mm.
You got to go out dating. You got to kiss a few frogs. And by dating, I mean, you meet with these people, you talk to them, now here's one big difference in dating. You talk to the people who they invested in before.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'd be talking like to ex significant others.
Yeah.
How'd that work out? Did they do what they said they would do? And you get information and you go out to dinner with them, you spend time with them, and then you get engaged. And an engagement's called an LOI in business, a letter of intent. Okay. And a letter of intent is, we're engaged. Okay. We're probably going to get married. We're probably going to have a transaction. We need to see beneath the cover. We need to see what's there. We want to see the book. We want to see the information. And you can continue to do the person who's bringing in investors can continue to do their due diligence, and the other parties do their due diligence. And then after all the due diligence, then you decide to get married or have the transaction. By the way, did you know that almost 50% of all Shark Tank deals do not close?
Really?
Yeah,
I
look
had
it
no
up.
idea.
It's almost 50% because the person who wants the investor, who wants the shark, makes all these statements, but then the shark does their due diligence.
Mm.
And oftentimes the shark will go, what you said is not quite accurate. Almost 50% of all Shark Tank deals, from what I've read, and I've read a bit about it on the internet, do not actually close. And so, you got to date, you got to get engaged, a letter of intent. And then if you decide to move forward and you have a good partner, you get married, you do the transaction and you keep going. And it's been over 10 years for me. And I just love what I'm doing. And I have good partners who run the business. They do all the hard stuff. I get to do the fun stuff.
Once again, it's a worthy goal. Yeah.
It
You've
took me 30 years to get to that, but I was happy doing what I was doing
yeah.
until I wasn't.
Yeah. Well, thankfully you exited at the right time. Speaking of which,
I didn't exit. I'm still here.
I'm sorry. I keep saying exit.
Yeah, I didn't exit. That's important for the BNI members to know in particular. I mean, your
Sure.
listeners probably could care less, but my BNI members need to know I'm still an owner. I
Okay.
still own part of this company that I started. And I'm sure I have an expire by date. I just don't know what it is. I have no retirement date in mind.
Is pivot maybe a better word, or how would you say it?
Well, pivot's okay. There was a transaction and I brought in partners.
Okay.
That's really quite accurate.
Well, I want to talk about, you've got a new book coming out. Tell us about that.
Well, the one that's coming out or the one that came out?
Let's see, the one that came out,
Infinite Legacy.
Infinite
Yeah.
Legacy.
Yeah. So Infinite Legacy was a good book to do with a couple of people who I did another book with, Infinite Giving. Julian Lewis and Greg Davies did help me. They co-wrote Infinite Giving and now Infinite Legacy. And you've got a copy of Infinite Legacy, and you know the opening. It's probably one
Yes.
of my favorite openings to any book I've done. And for your listeners, not for you because you've read it, for your listeners, for viewers, it opens up with a story about a man, elderly man. I think he was in his 60s. A true story. He's sitting in a coffee shop. He's having some coffee. He's reading the newspaper. This is over 100 years ago, a long time ago. He's reading the newspaper and he gets to the obituaries and it says, "The merchant of death has died." And he's like, "Wow." Whew. And he reads, and it's his name. And he's like, "Well, that can't be me." And he reads the bio, and it's him. And so, the newspaper thought he had died, and so they called him the Merchant of Death, and they called him the Merchant of Death because he had invented dynamite to take down buildings and for mining, but of course it was used in warfare. And so he had this accidental legacy. He didn't invent dynamite for warfare, but it was being used for that. And he decided not long after to create a foundation, a charitable organization. And literally on one sheet of paper, he hand wrote his outline for this foundation that would recognize achievements and new knowledge in mathematics, in science, in literature, in social interaction. And so he created this foundation. And the gentleman's name, as you know, Matt, is Alfred Nobel. And of course, we all know about the Nobel Prizes, one of them being the Peace Prize, which he definitely did because dynamite was used for warfare. And we all know, I mean, almost everybody recognized the Nobel Prizes, but oftentimes many people don't know that Nobel created dynamite. And so he took his accidental legacy and created an intentional legacy. Mm-hmm. So what we do with the book is we try to talk to people about how you can create your own intentional legacy. And you don't have to be a millionaire to create an intentional legacy. You can do it by, raising your children well. If you were to look at my parents, you'd say, well, they didn't really leave much of a legacy. They were poor. I grew up in a very reasonably low income, one parent income family in a working class neighborhood. And we never had much money. And you'd say, well, what kind of legacy did they leave? Well, they did a pretty good job in teaching me a number of things, whatever people skills I have because of my mother. And I got my work ethic from my father. And those two things enabled me to do things that have impacted hundreds of thousands of people. So their legacy is how they raised their children. And so there's a lot of different kinds of legacies that one can leave. It can be financial. It could be the relationships you have with the people close to you or the people that you meet. And we talk about all of those different opportunities in the book.
Wow. My favorite philosophies of yours is giver's gain. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about here is helping more and more people throughout your life is a huge legacy. Can you tell us about giver's gain and how that works?
Yeah, giver's gain is really how you treat other people. It's sort of the idea of what goes around comes around. Giver's gain is more than a phrase to me. It's a way of living one's life. It's a perspective to view and interact with the world. And when it's applied properly, it'll change your life. And when it changes enough lives, it'll change the world. And it's really about helping other people before you have an expectation of them to help you. And we incorporated that into BNI as our principal core value because networking was when I started with BNI, and to this day, most people, we still don't teach it in colleges and universities. And most people think networking is a very transactional. They use networking as a face-to-face cold calling opportunity instead of using it as a way of building a relationship with somebody. And the best way to build a relationship with somebody is to help them in some way. And if you can help them in some way, that's the beginning of the creation of a relationship. And so giving first is a great way to build your business and to live a life. And so we have infinite giving first, and of course, then infinite legacy. But giver's gain is a key element of infinite legacy.
One of my favorite analogies, and it's a little bit weird if you see me in person, I'm 6'3", I'm kind of a big guy, is the bathtub analogy. And if you imagine sitting in a bubble bath and you if you pull things towards you, the bubbles go away from you, like in this spiral. And if you give first, they kind of spin towards you this way. And that's just on one plane. but I think about it sometimes as multiple planes, like a 3D or 5D type thing.
Yeah.
So yeah,
That's a
yeah,
great analogy. I've never heard that analogy. I like it.
yeah,
I may
yeah.
borrow it.
Feel free. It's always a little weird then because people look at me and think of me in a bathtub.
Yeah.
Or I had somebody the other day say, "How do you get in a bathtub?" I'm like, "Well, my knees bend." I mean,
Yeah.
it's pretty obvious. So,
Yeah.
what else are you working on?
Well, I mentioned I'm working on a book called Garage to Global, and how do you take your business out of your garage, which BNI started in my garage and in a small room above my garage. And how do you make it a global enterprise? There's three important sections to the book. The first section is how do I, as the founder, start to scale the company? And I will be writing most all of that. And my co-author, the past CEO of BNI, will be doing color commentary. The second section is what if you decide you want to do a transaction and you're going to either sell or bring in partners? How do you do that? What do you think about? As the person who's looking for the investor, what do you think about? As the person who's looking to invest, what do you think about? And both of us are going to do that section, our own piece, and merge them. And then the third section is okay, you've invested in a company. You now want to really truly make it global, not just, I mean, BNI was international, but we weren't a real global enterprise. We weren't the size we are now. And so, how do you truly make it a global enterprise? And then he's writing that section, and I'm doing color commentary. We also have 363 written interviews we've done, plus
Wow.
about a dozen in person interviews and a survey of over 2,200 people. All of
Wow.
that is part of this book. And so we think it's a book that entrepreneurs will be interested in, that anybody who's thinking about buying a company or investing in a company would be interested in. And we also think that colleges and universities might be interested in it as a supplemental text.
Absolutely. It sounds like a great textbook, a great case study for any entrepreneur,
Yeah.
anybody. Yeah.
Yeah. It won't be just about BNI, but BNI is certainly going to be well represented. But in order for it to be a book that really would apply to everybody, it's going to be talking about many companies, not just us.
And when does that come out?
That's a good question.
Yep.
We hope to have the manuscript completed this year.
Okay. Great. Sometime maybe late
So probably
2020.
2026. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Well,
We've
great.
got two publishers that are on the hook that we're talking to.
All right. As we kind of start wrapping up, what haven't I asked you that I should have asked you about?
Well, oh, gee, where do you want to start? How much more time do we have? There's a lot of things I could talk about. I mean, one of my favorite topics is the issue of balance. And I think you and I have talked about that. I think I've talked about it at the Jack Canfield program. And your audience, Matt, is entrepreneurs.
Yeah, entrepreneurs who are either starting or kind of at plateaued and looking to get to the next level.
Yeah. So one of the things, particularly entrepreneurs, they're always looking for how do I create balance, work-life balance. And so I have the secret to work-life balance, and I'm going to share it with you here. Are you
All
ready,
right.
Matt? You've probably heard
I'm
me say
ready.
this. All right,
I've got my pen handy. I'm writing it down.
everyone who's watching or listening, hear this. Forget about balance. You'll never have it. It's just not possible. We look at balance. Well, first of all, when I say that, when I'm saying that to a live audience, I almost always hear one person up front groan, like, oh, I thought I was going to get something good. You're going to get something good, but it's not balance, because we look at balance like scales. And our personal life has to be in balance with our professional life, and our health has to be in balance with our spirituality, and it's all got to be in balance. And the truth is, life is a juggling act, not a balancing act. And so I don't think balance is possible. And so I recommend people let that concept go and instead think of life in a form of harmony versus balance. Harmony versus balance. And even the graphic for harmony, the yin and the yang, are out of balance if you separate them. Now, you've been to my house. Did we walk out to the Bagua circle?
Yeah, we did.
So the
Absolutely.
Bagua circle is a yin and yang circle for martial arts. And I don't know if you remember the bench that I have out there, but
I
I
don't
have
remember that
an
part.
oak. There was a big oak tree that had fallen, and I turned this big oak tree into a bench. And the
Uh-huh.
word across the back is harmony. And
Oh,
so I most definitely did not live a life of balance, but I have lived a life of harmony. And I talk about this a lot in a book I wrote called Who's in Your Room. and it's about the people that you surround yourself with. And I think you can create a life of harmony. And we talk about how do you do that? And I'll give you at least one of the techniques here. Be here now. Wherever you are, be there at that moment. So don't be at work thinking about the fact that you didn't spend enough time with the family last night, and don't be at home thinking about the project that's got to be done at work. If you're doing that, you're not present. You're not fully present to the moment. And it's very important to be fully present to the moment. And I lived a life that was definitely not in balance, but I lived a life that was definitely in harmony. I mean, I have 2.5 million miles just on American Airlines. And
Wow.
so, I traveled extensively throughout my career. So I wasn't home a lot. However, when I was home, I really tried to be fully present. I was home for dinner every night, had family dinner every night that I was home, and I spent time with the kids on the weekend. And that's one of the ways. And I talk, for those of you interested, pick up a copy of Who's in Your Room, and you get the whole list of things on how to create a life of harmony versus balance. Plus, you can go to my blog, ivanmisner.com, and I also have, if you type in harmony, you'll find a blog or two where I've written about it.
That's great. We have about 5 or 10 minutes left. Is there anything else that you would like to mention? BNI.com?
Yeah, BNI.com. Anyone that's interested in getting information about BNI, it's a great place to go learn about the organization. Yeah.
You have an interesting story about how you communicated with your son on whatever channel they're using. Can you
Yeah.
share that story?
Yeah. Actually, it's in a couple of my books. I think it's in Networking Like a Pro second edition. So if you get the second edition of Networking Like a Pro, this story is in there. It's actually part of follow up. I have a section on how do you follow up when you meet people. And the system is called the 24/7/30 follow-up system. 24 hours, 7 days, 30 days. Okay. And believe it or not, my son's story is, I think this is what you're talking about. My kids, and it wasn't just my son, it was all three of my kids, taught me a very important lesson on how to communicate with them. And so the 24 hours is when you meet somebody at a networking event, drop them an email, send them a handwritten note, send something to them that says, hey, it was great meeting you. I hope our paths cross again. Don't sell to them. People are compelled to say, hey, and if you need my products or services here, call me. Don't do it. They don't know you. People say it never hurts to ask. That's not true. It does hurt to ask if there's no relationship, I believe. If they're interested in your product or service, they'll tell you. What you want to do is build a relationship. So within 24 hours, reach out to them and say, hey, it was great meeting you. Love this discussion about XYZ. And this is particularly true for people that you really want to connect with. Right? Within 7 days, connect on their social media. So one of the things when you're talking to them is find out where are you most active on social media? LinkedIn, Facebook. For me, it's Facebook. I've got about 360,000 followers on Facebook.
Wow.
And so, but I am very active on LinkedIn and Twitter. I'm even on TikTok, if you can believe that. So I'm on Instagram, but Facebook is where I have the most followers. So find out where they have the most followers, go there and connect with them on social media. Maybe it's just their private Facebook page. Connect with them if you can on social media and comment on some of their posts. Say, hey, that was really interesting. Thanks for sharing it or something. So they see you now. They've gotten your email, and don't sell to them. Don't send them a private message saying, hey, if you're ever interested in my product or whatever. So I thought that was really interesting. But I learned to go to the place they enjoy most from my kids. Because on my eldest, she just turned 39. But when she was 17, I would call her on my telephone and she wouldn't answer. And I'd be like, seriously? But I'd text her, boom, she'd respond immediately. And I remember having a conversation with her once and saying, honey, this is a telephone. You can put it up to your ear. You can speak here. We can actually have a conversation. Okay, Dad, whatever. So I learned that with my eldest. Then my second child, Dorian, I would call her nothing. I would text her nothing. But I talked to my late wife, Elizabeth, and I said, Dorian won't respond to me. What do I do? And my wife said, you have to WhatsApp her. Now, she's now 33. This was when she was 16 or 17. So it was a long time ago. She said, you have to WhatsApp her. I said, what's WhatsApp? I don't know what that is. And so my late wife helped me download WhatsApp. And I tested it. I called Dorian, nothing. I texted Dorian, nothing. I WhatsApped Dorian, boom, responded immediately. Okay, got it. Now I understand the rules. Then came my son. Well, he forget about calling him, forget about texting him. He didn't like WhatsApp, but he was a gamer. did a lot of games, still is. And he had a platform. He'd get on buy a lot of games on Steam, which is an online platform where you can get games, and they have an instant messaging feature. And so he was 18, he was out of the house, and I would call him nothing, text him nothing. But so I was in my late 40s, early 50s. I actually got on Steam and bought a game so that I could have instant messaging. And if he was online, I'd instant message him, "Hey, Trey, how are you doing?" And he'd go, "Yeah, what do you want, Dad?" But he'd respond, but he didn't respond to anything else. So I learned from my kids that if you really want to talk to the person, you got to communicate in the platform that they like to communicate. If you don't care, then don't try to change. Don't go to their platform. But if you care and you really want to connect with somebody, connect with them on the platform that they're most interested in and try and do that within 7 days. The 30 is within 30 days, reach out to them and set up a time to connect and sit down and just say to them, "Hey, I'd like to learn more about your business. And maybe you'd be willing to learn a little more about my business." And here's the tough part. Don't sell to them then either. It's like a sales spasm. People just can't help themselves and they try to sell, but build a relationship first. I think that's the story you were looking for, wasn't it?
That's exactly the story I was talking about. In EMS, we have different radio channels. One, you talk to dispatch, one, you talk to hospital, one, you may talk to a different fire department. And so I think that's a big part of communication and networking is having that communication. Make sure you're on the right channel, whether it's Facebook, LinkedIn, Xbox, whatever it is. So,
yeah. Hey, you want another quick, I know we're almost out of time. You want another quick story about my son that goes back to the harmony. You know, when he was about 17 or so, we were sitting, it was at my house in Claremont, at this gigantic big screen television. We're sitting down in front of this television. We're playing Halo. And he's just kicking my butt and playing Halo. I mean, he's just kicking my tuchus. And we were leveling up. And because particularly back then, I was traveling every other week. And I looked over to him and I said, "Hey, this goes back to the story on harmony or the lesson on harmony, Matt." I said to him, "Hey, buddy, do you feel like I was around enough for you as you were growing up?"
Oh.
He looked at me and he said, "What?" I said, "Was I around enough for you as you were growing up?" He's like, "You're around all the time." I'm like, "Well, I don't know if you noticed, but I'm actually gone every other week for at least a few days." He said, "Yeah, I know, but it's like when you're here, you're totally here. Can we get back to the game now?" And I'm like, "Yes, we can. Let's get back to the game." And to me, it felt so good knowing that I could live a life out of balance, but a life in harmony, and that my children felt that I was present. And that made it all really gel for me. And that's why that got put in the book.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as a father, that definitely resonates and it ties in with wherever you are, be there, right?
Yeah.
Be present for your kids. So even though you had 2.5 million miles on American Airlines and you weren't there, obviously a lot, it really is a testament to what you did while you were there. So,
yeah, thanks, Matt. It's always good talking to you, Matt. You're welcome to come on over for dinner again sometime.
All right. Dr. Ivan Misner, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, take care.
All right, you too.